God is good. He's with us today. All right. Well, here we go. We're going to start off with a story like we do every week. We're talking about best friends. Just before we started, maybe some of you weren't here, hadn't tuned in yet. Did you think of a best friend from some point in your life? Maybe even, hopefully, you have one right now. And what does it feel like to be around that best friend? We're going to use that idea as we go through the message today to get at a particular feeling that we're going to see in the book of John that we're looking at. First thing I want to do, let's pull up this picture. I got a picture of me and some of my buddies from high school. Okay, this is a picture of me. I'm right here, if you don't notice. That's me. That's me. And this is not that long ago. This is not in high school. This is me and my friends from high school, but almost 20 years after high school, okay? And this is 2015. This is down in Olympia, Washington, and this is at an awards ceremony for, the guy standing next to me is our coach from track and cross country. I did a lot of long distance running. Any distance runners in the crowd? A couple, maybe you've done that before. That's what I was really into. I did it in college for a little while too. Fantastic experience. So this coach, we're going to use, his name is Dave and Annanen. Well, I'll use his last name, Coach Annanen. That's what we called him. And he was, to me, in high school, and to all these people who are in this picture, a very, very special person. And it wasn't because he taught us how to run or get better at track and cross country. It was because of what it was like to be with him. You know how it is in high school, you're all insecure. Maybe you're past high school and you're still all insecure. You're all insecure, and there's tension, and there's cliques, and it's a dark time for a lot of people. There's good things there too. There are some good things in high school, right? No, I got no responses in the room to that. Well, when we would go through our whole day in high school, we'd be in that kind of an environment. Somebody described it earlier to me as just a lot of noise. It's so noisy. I think that's true in a lot of different ways. And then we would go to cross-country practice or to track practice. And it was like when you got into this guy's presence, it was like all those things melted away because they didn't exist for him. He was the kind of person that when you were around him, you felt like you were the most important person in the world. He would come up, he would be so genuinely excited to see you. He'd probably crack some joke and do something weird to mess with you. That was his favorite thing. But as soon as you walked in, and what it would do is the different cliques, right, would evaporate in his presence. So some people who were, in the popular group, or some people who were really, the outcasts in high school, they were all in the same group when they were around him because the group formed around him just by his presence. He always was genuinely interested in what we were doing in our lives, what was going on with us. And it kind of didn't matter who you were. You were part of the group when you were with him. I didn't know it at the time. I was not a Christian. I didn't know it at the time, but he was. He never told us that. He prayed with me one time all the way through high school. And I think that now as I look back on my life, I think he is a big part of the reason that I became a youth pastor for a long time. Because he changed my life so much, not by really doing a whole lot, just by who he was and how he was with us. When you have people like that in your life, sometimes there are little things that stand out. Like when you look back in your life, you really got to bring up that person in your life. Maybe it was a best friend who gives you that feeling of total acceptance. Or maybe it was somebody else. Maybe it was an older person, a teacher or a coach, somebody like that. Maybe someone in your family even that gives you that feeling of total acceptance. And often when we look back at those relationships, what I find is that it's the little things that stand out to me. It's not the big things, it's the little things. And there's this one moment that sort of epitomizes Coach Annanen to me. Okay, I graduated in 1998. It's a while ago. Some of you were like, that's like yesterday. And some of you were like, 1998, what? Okay, so anyway, it's in the middle. In the 90s, when I was in high school, it became a cool thing for like gangster type people to go around with one pant leg rolled up to the middle of their calf. Do you remember this? It was so cool, and you had to be cool enough to pull this off, right? You had to be like, oh yeah, a total thug to pull this off, to go around with one pant leg rolled up. And if you did and you could pull it off, nobody could talk to you. And you couldn't smile while you did it either. You had to be like deadpan serious, even though you looked absolutely ridiculous. So here's how Coach Annanen was. One day, we show up for the first day of cross-country practice for the year, and he's got one pant leg rolled up. I'm going to do it in honor of Coach Annanen right now, okay? Okay, look at him. He didn't look, this is 15 years later, but this is what he looked like in high school too. So if people tune into the message halfway through, they're going to be like, why does Pastor Isaac have one pant leg rolled up? Because it's going to stay. This is in honor of Coach Annanen. All right, and so he shows up to cross-country practice like this, and he says nothing about it. He just walks around his usual self, cracking jokes, he was kind of goofy and bouncy. This was kind of who he was. And all that anybody could talk about was, why does Coach Annanen have one pant leg rolled up? Does he know that he has one pant leg rolled up? I don't know. But it epitomized for me the way that he could just absolutely destroy and obliterate those divisions that were between us most of the time. He taught us, actually, how to treat and draw in the kids who weren't the cool kids. He taught us how to do that. And even the guys who normally walked around like this, they were disarmed in his presence. It was a powerful thing. It was actually something I think he learned from his life of following Jesus. All right, we're going to jump into our message for today. Remember, we're in the Comeback series. We're looking at the book of John in the Bible. And we're going to look at this in a little bit different way. We're taking a fresh look at the life of Jesus. And how many people were able to catch last week's message, either in person or online at some point after? We spent time last week thinking carefully about John himself, who wrote this book, and what it was like for him as he's writing this book in his later years, right? In maybe his late 80s, or maybe he's even as old as 90 when he's writing this book. He's thinking back to the time when he was a teenager. We're not exactly sure how old he was, but probably a middle or older teenager while he was with Jesus on earth. And he's thinking back to what it was like to be around Jesus. And he's also looking forward. Remember, we said that there are some people with him as he's writing this book, right? 2 young men who he's training, and he's trying to capture for them what it was like to be there with Jesus, how that transformed him and his generation. And he's trying to bring that vision to this new generation that he feels like is not quite understanding, that Jesus is actually still right here with us. So he's trying to help us see what it was like to be there with Jesus, so that we can recognize when Jesus is present in our own lives right now. That's a huge thing for John. And what we're doing through these first few messages is we're just looking at a bunch of stuff that Jesus did. We're not going to there's not going to be a real application point from today. We're just going to think carefully about what it was like to be there. What it was like from John's perspective, from some of his friends' perspectives. We're going to look at Nathaniel today and a few others. We're going to be dropping down, during this series, we're going to drop down into different points in the book of John. And today we're going to drop down into chapter 4. And we're going to look at what John remembers as he thinks about who Jesus was, what it was like to be in his presence, and the little things that stand out to John. Over the next few weeks, we're going to bring out the big guns, right? Like massive miracles. What are some of the big guns? Come on. What are some of the biggest miracles you think of when you think of Jesus? Yeah, feeding the 5,000. Yeah, boom, I can feed 5,000 people. You got more bread than you could ever eat. What else? Big ones. Raising the dead. Boom, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Yeah, back to life, right? Big guns, big guns. What's that? Coming back to life himself. Yeah, hey, I'm going to die and I'm going to come back to life. Yeah, right. Boom, there he is. Okay, there are some big guns. Walking on water, right? There are some big, huge things that he did. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. For Jesus' first followers, for the ones who were closest to him, sort of his best friends, if you will, the guys that we often call the disciples, that's not why they first started following him. Almost none of them first started following him because of some big, crazy miracle. They first started, sometimes it was a miracle, but often it was a miracle that only would have mattered to them. And sometimes it was just a few words that Jesus spoke that changed their lives forever. And we don't even know why, because the things that he did were so personal to these men that he met. All right, so let's check it out. We're going to read quite a bit of chapter 4 today out loud. Let's start off. Actually, we're going to start off in chapter 1, and then we'll jump into chapter 4. So chapter 1, here's a story about Nathanael. Now, Nathanael was one of these first group of friends, and John's telling us this story as he remembers it. John was there when this happened. And this is the first time Nathanael has met Jesus. That's what's going on here. Okay? And what's happened just before this, you don't need to know too much, but Jesus has gone out to meet John the Baptist. If you don't know who that is, don't worry. John the Baptist is a crazy man in the wilderness, and he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." This is what he says as soon as Jesus walks in the room. We'll come back to that later. Nobody really understood what John was saying. He's got hundreds of people around him. He declares Jesus to be the Lamb of God. Like 4 people go follow Jesus. It's like this moment where it's a little confusing. And then Philip, who's one of the ones who's following Jesus now, he goes off and gets his buddy Nathanael. He's like, there's somebody you have to meet. As far as we know in the Gospel of John, these guys have not seen Jesus do a miracle yet. They've just met him. All they know is what it's like to be around him. That's all they know so far. And here we go. All right, so Philip found Nathanael, and he told him, "We've found the one." That's a pretty bold thing to say. You haven't even seen the guy do a miracle yet. We've found the one that Moses wrote about in the law. I think we found the guy that Moses predicted thousands of years ago would show up. The one that we've been waiting for thousands of years. I think we found him. Haven't even seen him do a miracle. How do you know? And about whom the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Okay. Next, Nathanael's reply is hilarious, right? Nazareth? Can anything good come from there? So he didn't like Jesus' hometown, right? This is a little village that Jesus wrote. It's kind of like if somebody said, "Hey, I found the Messiah. He's from Surrey." And then what would somebody from Vancouver say? "Oh my goodness, seriously, from Surrey? No way." Or somebody from Langley? They would not like, no way. The Messiah can't come from Surrey. There's no way. All right, so can anything good come from there? Nathanael asked. And Philip just says, "Come see." There's no way you're going to understand I can't explain it to you. Come meet him. Okay? So he goes. So when Jesus saw Nathanael, he says of him, "Here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Now, that's not the way we usually talk. Maybe it's a little bit too flowery of language for us. Do you get what's happening here? Put yourself into that spot. Jesus is super excited to see Nathanael. He's never met him before. But as soon as he sees him, he's like, "Here he is. Here's the one I've been waiting for. Here's the guy who there's nothing false in this guy. Look at this guy. Look what he could become." Jesus turns and looks at Nathanael. Nathanael hasn't even spoken. And what Jesus sees in him is this great man of God and what he could be. And I think in that moment, Nathanael probably thinks some bad things about himself. We don't know for sure, but he's probably walking into this situation just like many of us, discouraged with life, feeling like he's failed lots of times, feeling like he doesn't measure up. And when Jesus looks at him, he sees something far beyond what Nathanael is at that moment. What would that make you feel like? You got notes if you're in person here. If you're at home, grab a piece of paper and write down, what do you think Nathanael felt like when Jesus looked at him that way? Yeah. I think he felt at first like he must have felt like the most important person in the world at that moment. To Jesus, I think he was the most important person in the world in that moment. Nathanael responds and says, "How do you know me? Like, what do you mean? Why would you think this way?" Jesus answered, "I saw you while you were still under the fig tree. before Philip called you. And we have no idea why Jesus says that to him. But when Jesus says that to him, it undoes Nathanael. It's something personal to do with him. We don't know why the fig tree is so important or the fact that he had been seen by Jesus before Philip had been there, but for some reason, some circumstance in his life, it is something that's so personal to him and so important that when Jesus says that to him, there is every doubt, everything else that was going to be important to Nathanael goes out the window in 1 second. Here's how Nathanael responds. This is the first time he's met Jesus. Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. 5 minutes before, there's nothing good that can come out of Surrey. Now, you're the Son of God. I'm ready to give my entire life to you. And we have no idea why. Because Jesus knew Nathanael so personally. He demonstrated to him in that moment that he had always been with him. He had always been there. This changes Nathanael's life forever. All right, we're going to jump forward into chapter 4 now. We're going to see a whole bunch. This is John remembering what Jesus has done. Think about John now again at the age of 90, looking back at this and remembering what it was like to be in Jesus' presence. And he's trying to get that across to you, to me, to the younger generation, to the future. Because it's still that way to be in his presence right now. That's what John's going to tell us. All right, we're going to jump into this next story. A story of total acceptance. I asked you earlier to think of a time when you had like maybe a best friend or someone else and you felt totally accepted by that person and in that relationship. And we're going to look here in chapter 4, the beginning of chapter 4, we have this story of the woman at the well. Many of you will know this story, and if you know it well, it is the right place to be today, to be looking at it again and in depth and thinking carefully what it would have been like to be her. And if you've never heard this story, brace yourself. All right, here we go. So I'll read the whole thing. It's a little bit long. I'll read through it kind of quickly. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water. All right, so Jesus is with his friends now. This is a little while later. He's got a group of disciples, and they needed to go somewhere. They were going to go, they're going back to Galilee, which is in the north. They're coming from Judea, which is in the south. And when they go a way that no one in Jesus' generation, no one in his ethnic group, the Jewish people, they go a way that no one would go. They go through the bad part of town. They go through the part of town where the bad people live. It's not just a part of town, it's a whole region. It's a little bit bigger than a town. But they go through Samaria. Okay? And I'm not going to put down any particular neighborhood, but think of a neighborhood that you think of as the bad place. Jesus decides to go through there, and his disciples are like, what? Why in the world would we go through there? And then he stops at a well. There's a well there, and he says, I'm going to stay here. His disciples are hungry. He says, whatever, go into town and buy food. I am coming to sit at this well. And his disciples are like, okay. So they go into town. He's by himself. When a Samaritan woman comes to the well to draw water, and Jesus says to her, will you give me a drink? The Samaritan woman said to him, you are a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? And John gives us this explanation. Because Jews do not associate with Samaritans. And men in this culture do not just go up and talk to random women. That doesn't happen. To Jesus, it's like nothing. Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Imagine him saying this. She's never met him before. She doesn't know the Bible. She doesn't know what he means by living water. This is a random encounter on the street. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? I imagine she's probably making fun of him a little bit at this point. Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock? Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water, so I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. He told her, Go, call your husband and come back. I have no husband, she replied. Jesus said to her, You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you've just said is quite true. Sir, the woman said, I can see that you are a prophet. Is that the end of what we got there? He responds by telling her that he is the Messiah, the one who was to come into the world. Now, do you have that scene pictured in your mind? You're sitting here in church or you're sitting at home. You have work to do. Your work is not just to sit and let the words wash over your brain. Your work is to imagine, is to think carefully about what it was like to be there. Do you have it pictured in your mind, what it was like for this woman to be there listening to Jesus? We'll come back to this story. The way this series is going to work is we're going to come back to these stories again and again and look at a few different elements in the story. So this isn't our only time we're going to look at this, but we'll draw out just a few key pieces today. Look at how personal. Look at how personal Jesus is in this moment. Look at how totally he accepts her. And look at how he changes her life with just a few words. Now, first of all, let me ask you this question. Why is he even in Samaria? I said before we read it that his disciples are like, why are you going into the bad part of town? And notice he goes straight there. He goes straight to a particular well, and he sends all of his disciples away. He says, get out of here. He sits there and waits even though there's no one there. What do you think? What's his plan? He's not just waiting randomly. He knows that this particular woman is coming. In fact, he has come to Samaria just to find her. That's the whole reason he's come. Look at how personal he is. In this moment, who is the most important person in the world to Jesus? It's this one woman. It's someone that he's not even supposed to talk to. Just like my coach in high school, we'd all show up with our cliques and our special friend groups, and it was like he couldn't even see them. He shows up with his gangster leg and obliterates all our divisions. Jesus does the same thing here. There's all these divisions in society. This woman can't even imagine that she could talk to someone like Jesus, and he can't see the division. He walks right through it. And not only that, she's hiding from him. Do you see that? She's hiding who she is because she's messed up in her life a ton of times. Have you ever felt like that? Don't raise your hand. And you're hiding it because you think if the people around you see it, they're going to judge you, because they probably are. And then Jesus shows up and he sets her up. He messes with her. I mean, come on. The first thing he asks her is, can you give me a drink of water? That's the first thing he wants. He came here to give her something. And then he asks her to go call her husband. Why does he do that? The whole thing is a setup by Jesus. And then in this one phrase, by telling her what he already knows about her, he says something that's so personal to her that it undoes her whole life. It disarms all her defenses, and it makes her realize all in one moment that he knows who she is. He knows what she's done. He knows all the garbage. And he accepts her totally and completely just as she is. And that kind of love transforms her. You probably know what happens if you've heard this story. How does she leave? She leaves super excited, running back into town. Her emotions, everything about her is changed in a moment. She goes to tell people, I've met someone who's unlike anyone else I've ever met. And John is trying to get across to us, what was it like to be with him? All right, let's jump into the next story. This one is just what happens right after. The disciples come back just as this woman is leaving. Let's bring that next scripture up. The disciples come back just after as this woman is leaving, and they judge her immediately. That's their first move. And then they have a conversation with Jesus about food. And here's how it goes. Just then his disciples returned and were surprised to find him talking with a woman. They were judgy about the fact that he's talking with a woman, especially a Samaritan woman in the bad part of town. But no one asked, what do you want, or why were you talking with her? Just like we were afraid to ask our coach why he had his pant leg rolled up. He was too different from us. We were too in awe of him. So were they. Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah, the Christ, the chosen one? They came out of the town and made their way toward him. Meanwhile, the disciples, his friends, urged him, Rabbi, eat something. So we see here that Jesus has been fasting, probably for a long period of time. Perhaps it's been hours, perhaps it's been days, perhaps it's even been weeks since he ate. Think about that for a minute. We know for sure that there was one period in his life, in his ministry, where he didn't eat for how long? 40 days. 40 days he didn't eat. And here he's doing something very like it again. And we see he's not eaten for long enough that the disciples are worried about him. So it's probably been a while since he had something to eat. And he turns and he says this to them. They say, come on, eat something. We went and got this bread. You got to eat. You got to keep your strength up if you're going to do all this work. And he turns and he says, I have food that you don't know about. I have food to eat that you know nothing about. Then the disciples said to each other, could someone have brought him food? Jesus probably smacks his forehead or laughs under his breath. My goodness, how long is this going to take? My food, Jesus said, is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Now, what I want you to think about here, John is giving us another little piece of what it was like to be with Jesus, what it was like to be in his presence. Now, I think often, if you've read this before, what we often do is we first think, oh, what is his food? And then just like the disciples, when he says what his food is, oh, it's to do the will of his Father in heaven. Oh, yeah, whatever. Jesus is not eating. He's not eating physical food. And he seems to have no interest in it. And what he is saying here is that he is being physically sustained, nourished in a real, tangible way, not by physical bread, but by doing the will of his Father in heaven. What is the will of his Father in heaven? What has he just done? He is being fed by things like what he just did with that woman. He is being fed by things like what he spoke to Nathanael. That is filling him with power and strength to keep going. What John is telling us here is that this guy lived from a whole different reality than we most of the time live from. He sustained himself with a strength that comes from somewhere else. He didn't even have to eat. Now, eating is not bad, and Jesus did eat lots of times. Sometimes he ate too much, and people criticized him for that. People criticize him when he fasts. People criticize him when he ate too much. My goodness, what are we going to do here? This is a little snapshot of what it's like to be with Jesus. Okay, last story. After this, they return back to Galilee. So this is like, now he's back in his hometown, his home area. And here's the story of what happens. He goes back to Cana, which is near where he grew up. And what has already happened at this point? He did something before in Cana. Anybody remember? Cana is famous for one thing. Elijah, shout it out. 2 words. Water into wine. Yeah, so he's done a miracle here in Cana, but it's a secret kind of miracle. In fact, so far, all the miracles that he's done are super low-key. Could you imagine doing a low-key miracle? If I did a miracle, I would be really tempted to tell lots of people about it. He does a low-key miracle. And so people don't really know. There's kind of maybe a rumor that he has power, but nobody really knows. So once more, he visited Cana in Galilee, where he had turned water into wine. And there was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. When this man heard that Jesus had arrived from Galilee, in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and begged him to come and heal his son, who was close to death. Jesus, I don't know who he's talking to at this moment. Maybe himself. I guess he's talking to the man, but not really. Unless you people see signs and wonders, Jesus told him, you'll never believe. The royal official said, "Sir, come down before my child dies." The royal official can't even hear what Jesus is saying. "Go," Jesus replied. "Your son will live." The man took Jesus at his word and departed. While he was still on the way, his servants met him with the news that the boy was living. When he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, "Yesterday, at 1 PM, the fever left him. Suddenly, right at 1 PM. Then the father realized that this was the exact time at which Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." And so he and his whole household believed. Now, this is where this story is what we're going to stop with today. And we will come back to it and some others like it. But a couple things that we need to draw out of here. Jesus is coming back into his hometown, and he's just done all these little things for people, right? He's spoken to Nathanael, a word that we don't even know why it's so important to Nathanael, but it changed Nathanael's whole life in a moment. He's spoken to this woman at the well, and he has accepted her even though he knows everything that she's done. And that kind of love she has never experienced. And it's his presence, it's who he is that transforms her. It's not some huge miracle. It's not that the woman at the well goes, "Oh, okay, he knew some things about me he couldn't possibly have known. Therefore, I logically deduce he must be a prophet, and I think that he must," that's not it. It's that he demonstrates that he knows something, but even more than that, he demonstrates how he feels about her and who he really is, and that's what changes her forever. We saw that his disciples are left confused. We'll come back to that in a minute. This guy doesn't have to eat. What is he eating? He's eating doing the will of his Father in heaven. Okay, what does that mean? And now in this last one, we see he's come back into his hometown, and somebody shows up begging him to heal their son. Imagine what kind of emotional state that guy is in. So think about your child or someone in your family who's very close to you, and they are about to die. They're in ICU. How do you feel in that moment? You are desperate. And here's what happens. He begs Jesus. He's probably on his knees. He's probably crying to Jesus. He doesn't really know if Jesus can help him. He's not sure. But if there's any hope, then please come. And Jesus says no. He doesn't say no to helping him, but he says, "I will not come to your house." How does he feel like in that moment? I don't know, maybe desperate, maybe confused. Is this a good guy? Is he not? But Jesus says, "Go and your son's going to live." So he decides to put his hope in Jesus. He decides, okay, I'm going to take him at his word. He's probably really uncertain, really confused about what just happened. But when he gets home, he realizes that Jesus has done exactly what he asked. Notice, number one, that this is another kind of secret miracle, right? Jesus could have gone to his house, pulled this kid out into the street, and then laid hands on him and said, "Live in my name." And the kid would have jumped up, and this is the kind of stuff he's going to start doing. But he doesn't want to do it. Before he begins to bring out the big guns, the huge bombshells of his great miracles, he wants to know Who's going to believe? Who's going to be drawn to me because of who I am? Who's going to really love me because I love them first? Who is desperate to really know God? That's who he's looking for. And that's who he's finding in all of these situations. And this official is another instance. He doesn't become one of Jesus' disciples. I don't know, maybe not one of the 12 certainly, but he does believe. In that moment, that official could have just written it off, right? Jesus didn't even come to their house. His son is better, yeah, but it could just be a coincidence, couldn't it? Jesus leaves him all kinds of room to doubt. And yet the man chooses to believe. He chooses that because it was at the exact same moment, and I went and begged this guy, and he said that my son was going to live, and his fever left him right at that moment. I think this guy is really whoever he is, whoever he says he is, some kind of prophet, some kind of man who's truly connected to God. I'm going to put my trust in him. And so at the end of this scene in John chapter 4, John's trying to get across to us, remember, what is it like to be there with him? And what are we left with here? We're left with a bunch of people who are super excited about Jesus. They're excited because of who he is and what it's like to be in his presence. It's like maybe that best friend or that person who made you feel totally accepted, except way, way more, way beyond that. It's still like that to be in his presence today. And many of you know that from experience, and many of you haven't yet experienced that. You can be with him today, and it feels just like this. Nod your head if you know that that's true. It feels just like that. But maybe like the disciples, we are left in a spot at the end of this remembering that John is doing. We're left at a spot where they're excited. They're super happy by what's going on. They think this guy might have even more power than they'd thought in the beginning. He has power to transform us just by his words, but maybe he's got even more power. And Jesus has started to turn his attention, right? He said, look, unless people see really big miracles, they're never going to believe. I'm realizing that now. A few people are going to believe because they see who I am. But more people are going to need to draw crowds. To make a big noise, we're going to have to bring out the big guns. And that's what he's going to do next. But the disciples are also left in this moment confused. This guy's different than anyone we've ever met. He's exciting, but he's not like we thought he was going to be. Who is he? What is he doing? What does he eat that we don't have to eat? Where does his power come from? We're going to keep talking about that as we move forward in this series. Let's pray. We'll continue in worship. Our Father in heaven, we thank you